Well, this actually turned out really good timing-wise. Well, good as well as it can. Elisabeth and I had talked probably a month ago about having her come on. What do we want to do? We want to do a Best Made Weddings podcast, and you had some COVID, policies and ideas and things as a wedding planner. Obviously that you're talking with your couples about, and other vendors and whatnot. And on Friday, so this is Monday, on Friday, I got an email from my bride from our wedding last weekend, and she was COVID positive and had to, email, I assume, family and friends. I don't know all the details, if they had to let the hotel know and all these things, but, she let me know, and I had to go get a COVID test. I've never done that, was, worried. I mean, I felt like I had been through, it was Friday morning, the wedding had been last Saturday, but I felt okay about it. I've been working from home all week. But anyway, so this is really timely still, because the podcast, we try to do some COVID and not. We just did our wedding timeline chat, but obviously this is still going to be a thing going into next year, kind of talking about, not like responsibilities, but like, what are some good practices and things. And so I don't want to put Elisabeth on the spot today too much with like, legal advice, right? We're not trying to give any sort of like definite, this is what, you need to be doing or whatever. But I think we just want to talk about some good practices and things that you're talking, with your couples about, as they prepare for, weddings here into next summer, where this is still very much going to be on, top of mind. So thank you for coming on. That was a really long intro. I'm sorry. Please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Sure. No, and thank you so much for having me here, Reed. I mean, I know we chatted about this over email, but I'm really glad that things worked out for you. I know how scary that is. You're not the only vendor I've heard this year who has been in that situation. That's not the only couple I've heard who's been in that situation. So I'm glad that you're healthy. As far as who I am, my name is Elisabeth Kramer, and I am a day of wedding coordinator based in Portland, Oregon. Before COVID, during COVID, my whole work is to really tear down the wedding industrial complex is kind of what I talk about. So the way that I do that, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of podcasting on my own show. I host an event for vendors. And then I talk to couples, both couples who are my clients, whom I coordinate for, and also just couples out in the world who are trying to make sense of what this looks like right now. Wedding planning has never been easy, so why not add a global pandemic, right? So that's who I am, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's tough because it's something that everyone is dealing with, right? And there's obviously different mentalities behind it, and trying to stretch things out to get the tippy top of what's being allowed and what's not. I think the focus on our podcast, my podcast specifically here, has been to focus on what you can do safely as a couple planning the wedding and not lamenting on what you can't do. And we've had certainly great discussions with, Jenny Gigi and Anne Marie. We had the Grieving Your Wedding podcast we did a couple weeks ago, talking about dealing with some feelings of, sorrow and sadness of either having to cancel or postpone, or, what all that feels, because there's a lot of stuff. So I guess first off, where are you at on all this right now? We're beginning of November, and how's it going for you?
Oh boy, $1 million question, right? Well, at first I want to acknowledge I'm so glad to hear about kind of grieving your wedding. It's something that I really believe in this year. I have an article on my website that's all about, it's okay if you feel sad about your wedding. And that article is really addressed to couples, and it's addressed to couples because I was hearing a lot. I wrote it, I think, in the spring, so 5 million years ago in pandemic time, but in the spring, because I was hearing a lot from my clients and just from people I encounter in the world planning weddings. They were feeling insert negative emotion, usually directed at themselves, about their wedding. And I just really think that is such a challenging thing. And you always, in this line of work, I think you always have to start from a place of empathy. And that also goes a lot for vendors too. So as far as where I'm at, so I have done 3 weddings this year. To give kind of a metric, my goal was 20. I did 18 last year. So 3 is a very small season for me. I did 2 in February. So that was before COVID came to my part of the world. I actually did a wedding on Leap Day, which the first case of COVID was reported in Oregon on the 28th of February. So it was all right then. And I have this kind of gross post now in hindsight on my website I wrote about going to a wedding where there's this thing called COVID and people were talking about it, but what is it? Why are we scared? Well, that that, that's a little kind of makes you grimace 8, 9 months later. But so I did 2 in February, and then I my season for 2020 throughout the summer canceled or rescheduled for very good reasons. I would say the majority of my couples did what a lot of couples are doing, which they got married this year, so they had a wedding. The wedding was much different than they anticipated, and when I say different, it usually means a much smaller guest count. Usually not at the venue or venues they originally booked, with the goal of getting legally married. And then often doing some type of celebration, presumably next year in 2021. And then I had quite a few couples cancel, so they're making completely different plans. And then I had this one couple who wanted to, no matter what, they were going to get married in October, and they decided that they wanted to stick with a very reduced plan for what they originally had. So their originally guest count was about 80 to 100 people. And eventually the wedding was tailored, kind of a metric for me. And I think a lot of vendors will relate to this is, I'm not going to break the law. So my kind of metric has been is the event abide by county and state regulations. So this wedding did that. We had a very intense COVID protocol in place, which I'm happy to get into. And then it ended up being, I think at last count, it was 43 people, including vendors. Mask, social distancing, every safety protocol you can think about. And I have to admit, I left that wedding with a very different impression than I thought I would have, which I'm happy to talk about more. But kind of give you the snapshot of my year. 3 weddings, 2 in February, 1 in October. My season now starts again in June of 2021. So who knows where we'll be at by that time.
Well, and I think it's so important to develop, like you say, a COVID policy, with hopefully you're working with a planner, but otherwise, if you're planning to get married, because I do think there's still this sense that 2021 is going to feel a lot more normal than it really is. I don't know if that's the case, right? We have my wife's friends just got engaged, and they're trying to debate, do we try to do something this next summer? Do we wait?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people are. And I don't know what next summer is going to look like, and nobody does, right? And nobody does. But this idea that we're going to have 300 people and it's going to be no holds bar is not probably where we're going to be, right? Is that what you're thinking too?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. Doesn't everything feel loaded now? Like these things we used to talk about, but now it's like everything feels like loaded. I mean, obviously, this is my personal opinion, but I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I think that. I can't speak to where we'll be at as far as vaccine, as far as caseload, as far as death rate. Man, if I knew that information, I would share it loud and proud, but I don't know. What I do know is kind of 2 things. One, I do think just looking at how I'm not going to say slow, because I think slow is a negative word, but just the pace that a lot of the phase rollout has been, particularly. So I'm in Oregon. I know, Reed, you're based in Washington. My county in particular, Multnomah County, has been in phase 1 for months. I mean, the whole summer. And to give a sense, I mean, phase 1, the legalese around this is quite blurry, but in Oregon, there's a difference between social get-together and a gathering. So a get-together has a smaller guest count, like 10 people is kind of, and it varies. I mean, it varies week to week, but 10 people. And then a gathering is often what a venue is using right now. And that tends to be where weddings fall. And that is 50 people indoors and 100 people outdoors in Oregon, last I looked. And again, that's varying very much. This is actually more open than like Washington, where receptions are straight up not allowed. I mean, last I heard.
We've opened that now.
Okay.
Yeah,
so open now.
Yeah, as of now, I think they just extended. It was 10 o'clock, and then now it's a little extended. But yeah, we can do with 50 people or less.
But yeah, right to my point, right? I mean, it's like this moving thing, which I mean makes sense, right? The virus is changing, people's relationships changing. We're hitting record numbers right now. I mean, there's good reasons why this stuff isn't clean. But I think the bigger thing I've noticed, and I was just writing about this last week, is no matter where we're at with COVID, and I don't mean to discount that. I mean, obviously it's huge, and I don't want to discount it. But I think more than anything, attitudes have changed. And when I say that, I mean both for vendors, but I really mean for couples. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with couples this year that they've been in the vein of our COVID wedding. So I'm using that just for shorthand of our wedding that happened the way we adapted for COVID. We actually really liked it. And I think that, yeah, I say that laughing because I've noticed initially what happens is a lot of couples, they're faced with this horrible dilemma. And I don't want to discount at all the fact that a lot of people are having to choose, their most precious loved ones not being able to be there, thousands of dollars, not being able to make good on. I mean, these are huge problems. But couples are eventually coming to a plan that a lot of people would think is their last resort. So these are small weddings. These are what are often called micro weddings. I just like the word wedding because a wedding is a wedding and a is a wedding. But, it's probably 10 people, maybe fewer, usually all outdoors. And people are really liking them. And I really want to point that out. And I know it can seem counterintuitive coming from a wedding planner where I make my money booking weddings of somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 guests. But I'm mainly in this work because I believe in joy. And I believe in witnessing joy. And that was kind of the big takeaway I took from that wedding I worked in October was this felt like a wedding that was trying to happen in a time that no longer exists. And we may very well get back to that time. I mean, I don't know about you, Reed. I love a party. I very much want to go back to a world where we can all dance to Whitney Houston and hug our friends and family. I mean, of course, I think we all want to get there, right? We're not there right now. And so when I went to that wedding, I think that was my big impression of just like, this is 40 people sitting in a room and, we're all kind of freaked out because none of us have sat in a room with 40 people in months. And, were we 6 feet apart? Did we have all the windows open so it was airflow? Did people wear masks when they weren't eating and drinking? Yes. That was baseline because this is a real virus. This virus kills people. We were also all sitting in there and feeling kind of awkward. And, just to speak for, the couple's not on this call. But the feeling that I got was I didn't see that moment of joy, that access point that I look for in all of my couples of just kind of that rapture, that enjoyment, that pure joy that I do my work for. I didn't see that happen until everyone left, until they were with their core 10 to 15 people at the end of the night that I don't know what their personal rules were, but they were a bubble in some capacity. I'm not sure what their rules were for themselves, but this was a group that felt comfortable touching, felt comfortable being unmasked around each other, had been together for a while. That's when I saw the fun happen. And, I don't say that to be prescriptive. I don't say that to make couples feel bad. If you're playing by the law, if you're following the law, you're doing your best to be safe. I'm not going to tell you right or wrong. I'm just going to point out that I think a lot of people are striving to make joy happen under very intense circumstances. And you got to kind of push yourself here to think about, okay, this might not look like a wedding when we think about capital W wedding, but it can still be a wedding because we can still access joy. It might just be different than how we thought we were going to do it. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good point. And it's so tough because, like you said, these micro weddings things. We've done episodes talking all about this, about timelines for micro weddings and how to get the best photography. You can go back in the past episodes here, but the wedding that I just had on Saturday, and I'll be curious your thoughts on this. I don't want to say the DJ's name because I don't want to speak for them, but I was setting up for a live stream and we were having a discussion. And it's been my belief for months now that the micro weddings now that people, and I want to phrase this as positively as possible, that I think the micro weddings that people are doing now, they are in their head thinking that this is a placeholder, best we can do right now. We're going to have the big thing next year. And it's been my belief, and I don't think a lot of other vendors want to hear it or couples, but I think either people are going to between this year and next year decide that did suffice whatever they needed, or that they're just kind of over the planning thing. But it could be, because I'm trying to spin it. It could be positive, right? It could be, hey, the thing that we did that we thought was going to kind of stink and it was going to be 20 people and it was lame and that ended up being what we needed it to be, right? Or they're just going to say, F it, I'm totally done planning.
I'm burned out.
So where do you fall on that? What do you think?
Oh man, God, it tears me in two because from Beth Kramer, person in the world who does this work because she wants couples to have joy, start a marriage, access, have this wonderful day. I'm right there with you. It's like, couple, if you did your thing in 2020 or into 2021 and, if it did feel like kind of plan B or plan C, or as now happens, plan D, right? Or plan Z almost. But you do that and you actually have a wonderful time and that is your wedding. Great. You had a wedding and you started a marriage. I'm a big believer that the wedding is important. That is a beautiful day, but what you're starting is ideally a lifetime, right? I mean, the marriage is the thing that you are trying to give birth to. I mean, I just had a couple today that I'm working with next July. Very similar. They had a small, I can't remember their exact guest count, but 10 or 15 people this past summer. And they're already kind of floating the idea of the thing. We pushed everything to July 2021 for kind of the bigger party element. And they're already kind of like, we kind of did this thing and we're kind of happy with it. And like you said, Reed, I mean, there is a point where, I mean, my husband and I got married last year, in November, which in hindsight is like, oh, how did that happen?
Yeah, right.
But, I mean, I think about us and it's like, gosh, I can understand why couples feel this way, because if we had to do what a lot of couples are doing this year, I mean, would we really want to keep pushing this into 2021, 2022? I mean, it'd be so hard. It's just so much emotional labor. I mean, I know it's complicated because you could be losing money as a couple. You will be losing money as a couple. But yeah, I could see why couples want to cut their losses because they had their day. And I before, of course, that's all couple facing. But I really want to talk about the vendor part of this too, because vendors who are listening to this, man, I'm so sorry. I mean, I'm looking at my revenue. I'm looking at my paychecks this year. I'm making half of what I made last year. And most of that is from the government. So, and when I say that, I mean unemployment. And I want, that is a real stark reality that so many of us are facing. I host this event. We're going to do our next one on December 12th of this year. It's called Altered. And the reason we started it was just to get vendors together who feel like I do, as far as like, I love what I do, but I hate a lot about my industry. I hate the racism. I hate the sexism. I hate the fat phobia. I hate all that. So I want to talk to other people who feel like I do, who do this work and want to change the industry. And so we've hosted a couple of these, and then I got the committee together this summer and I was like, what the hell do we do now? Do we do one? Is that weird? And where we landed was we just want to get vendors together to make vendors less sad, because there's just so much sadness and grief. And I know so many people who are having to leave the industry out of duress, just because they can't pay their bills, and not because they're not good at their job, not because they're not pivoting, not because they're not trying. It's just, it's blood from a stone right now, for very good reason. And I don't say that to guilt trip couples. I want to acknowledge that, vendors, I hear you and I'm right there with you. And, I don't have an answer. I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have a way to pivot your company into profitability in 2020. But I can be your friend and I can talk to you about these ups and these downs. So, as far as to answer your original question, Reed, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that we're going to see a lot of that next year. And I don't know about you. I perpetually am kicking the can. So, I mean, right now I'm like, okay, made it through the election. Let's do Thanksgiving. Okay, next Christmas for me, or whatever holiday you may or may not celebrate in December. Okay, and then we'll get to 2021. And then I'll figure out what my 14 weddings look like for next year, which feels super wishy-washy and kills my planner heart. But I don't know a better way to make it through right now.
No, absolutely. And that was kind of my thing. And when all this started back in, March, April, because we had, 40 whatever on the books. And I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm going to wake up one day and there's going to be 100 emails right in my inbox. And I'm going to be like, what do I do here? But it has really been kicking the can. Like, let's get through the April ones. Okay. Now we're kind of through that. Okay. Let's see what June feels like. Okay. Now, and I really kind of had this fear. I think I've talked about it on the podcast, but a lot of my November weddings now that we're at were those May weddings that moved to November. And they really did think we are going to be able, we're not going to do it in May. We're going to do what we wanted to do. Where the opposite was my September and Octobers had kind of rationalized, okay, we're probably going to have to do something smaller. My November ones, I don't think ever thought in a million years, hey, this is going to be 9-10 months at this point. Like we're definitely going to have this under control. And they are now postponing. But as we approach November, I really thought like, I'm going to wake up one day, I'm going to have 10 emails from all these weddings and whatever. And it's kind of one after another, but it's never been that like overwhelming thing, but it has just been like this progressive.
It's constant. It's like I had waves a lot this year. I mean, for me, it was like pretty much every 60 days. And I would say as we kind of got closer to like July and August weddings this year, it was more rapid because, couples are people, right? I mean, they were reading the news, they were reading the headlines, and we were getting good at pandemic figuring out what this looked like, But yeah, I mean, for me, my hardest, like I feel like all of it is made up, but I made up this like one thing that it's like I hold on to, and kind of my light in the storm is like 60 days is kind of my hard marker for go, no go. And I say that to couples just because it's like, okay, 60 days out from any event, from a wedding, you have enough time that we can kind of figure out what the next plan is. But it's also close enough that maybe we'll have a better idea. I mean, I think 60 days when I used to say that in March or April felt like a lot of time, or, it felt like, oh, of course we'll know. Now, of course, in 60 days, things can change 3 different ways every week. So it's not as good a rule as I would like, but it is still kind of the one I point to. And I mean, that's kind of my benchmark right now, right? I mean, I think a lot's going to change again in January, of course, with the inauguration. Like, who knows, right? I mean, if we have a federal policy in this country against events, that's going to be its own thing, right? I mean, that will have pros and will have cons, but that'll be something. If we don't, it'll continue to be state and county. And kind of my touch point is, does it break the law? Like I said, I mean, I hate to be so weird about that, but I had a couple that I had to break up with this year who the wedding that they were planning for this past October, for October 2020, it was not legal in the sense that it broke county and state regulations. And, the way that I had that conversation was just, I'm not the planner to serve you anymore. I'm not going to tell you this is right or wrong. I'm not going to have a moral judgment on, is this a safe thing to do? It's just, if it's not legal, I'm not going to participate in it, and I wish you the best. But, I think for a lot of couples, it's not that black and white, right? I mean, it's much more just trying to figure out, well, how do we do this thing that we really want to do and still be healthy and safe? And I guess I would just challenge couples to, be honest that, just have conversations with your partner. Why are we doing this? Like, in so many ways, I feel that COVID has done to the wedding industry what I wanted to do to the wedding industry, which was to encourage couples to have these conversations with themselves about what are our priorities here before we just hop on the carousel of wedding planning, which is super easy to do. I say as a wedding planner and someone who just planned her own wedding last year. Let's sit down. Let's think about, how do we want to feel, like, beyond what we want to spend or how many people we want to have there, where we want to have it, when we want to have it. It's just, why are we doing this thing? Why are we birthing this marriage? And that, I think, is the best advice for couples. For vendors, I feel like we have a hard road to hoe too, just because how do you make money in a model that has completely upended? I'll be honest with you, I don't know. And I'm continuing to figure it out. So completely off tangent from what you're talking about, but I think it's all part of the same.
Yeah. And I want to get into, well, first off, to echo your point about sitting down to focus on what's important. I do think, and I've said this before on all the podcasts I do, that it really did, like, last, summer before last, and it really did feel like we had a lot of our weddings are 10-hour days. That's just normally what people book. And it really felt like you get to, hour 8 or 9, and these couples were done and they were tired and they didn't want to do, and like, we're talking, hey, do you want to go do beautiful sunset photos? We have this great night. We're done. We're totally done. We're totally done. And, and obviously it's to each couple to enjoy their day, but it seemed to me like, couples are almost just tired going into the day, right? That they're overwhelmed, they're burdened, and then they go through all this, and then it's 10 hours and we're seeing everybody. And so that was my hope too, like you said, that maybe this would force people, when a lot of things are taken away or whatever, what is important for us to still try to do, right? And like our, the live stream I just did on Saturday, they did a really small, ceremony. And then I think there was 10 people there, and then there was 35, 40 people watching online, but they used it. I thought the officiant did a great job of retelling the couple's story. Really, but it just interesting, gave context to everything, really told their story. And really, I thought it was a really nice, for me just being hired to live stream, like a 25-minute ceremony. I thought that it was the best use of that time that they could have had to be like, okay, this is our day. This is how we met, whatever. And so, but I want to focus here now, kind of moving forward. I got it here with your COVID policy and kind of talking with couples. And I will say, we're in the process of booking the wedding for next August. I sent them some stuff today, and they had asked me, "Hey, what is your COVID cancellation policy?" And I know that this is slightly different than your COVID, but it was interesting to me because, and I've just kind of flat out told them back. I said, there will be no cancellations now. I mean, we know that COVID is a thing. If we need to postpone, if we need to downsize, if we need to reduce coverage, if we need to, shift whatever, but there is no cancellation policy. Like, we're past all that now, right? Like, and I guess maybe I'll get your feedback on that before we get into this. But I mean, I really do feel like this whole bit, when it was March, April, May, all this, hey, what are we going to do? And do we, the force majeure and all this stuff. I'm like, we're all kind of done with that now. Like, everybody kind of
all became lawyers for a hot second in March.
Yeah, but like, everybody knows it's a thing now, right? And we only had one of all the weddings we moved this year. Like I said, it was like 35, 40 weddings. I only had one. It wasn't hostile, but I only had one upset interaction with a couple, and it was because they just wanted to flat out cancel. And I said, I totally understand that. I absolutely, respect that. But that is a choice now you're making versus downsizing, postponing, rescheduling, delaying, kicking the can, whatever you want to do. You deciding to cancel, that is a personal decision that's outside of everything else. So I guess first off, as a roundabout, then we'll finally get to the stuff that we meant to talk about. Sure. But what do you think about that this whole like COVID cancellation thing, now that we know it's a thing?
Oh, I think I have two thoughts going in my mind. The first one, and I recommend this article to vendors and to couples, and I'll share it with you, Reed, so you can include it wherever you'd like. But there's a planner based in Seattle, Cindy Savage, of Aisle Less Traveled. And she has a wonderful article that I've referenced a lot where she talks about, I mean, I'm going to not do justice to her thesis, but the gist I took from it was, couples, this is why you don't get refunds. And, that sounds really harsh, but the thought there is, and I think it's very easy to forget about, is that this is the money that vendors live on. I mean, this isn't like the way that I structure my contract. And before COVID, it was 50% payment, deposit, non-refundable, and then 50% balance due 2 weeks before the wedding. I've since changed that to thirds just to try and space things out. But, the language in my contract's the same, that any money somebody gives me is non-refundable. And again, that seems really harsh. Like, well, gosh, I mean, never. And I'll talk about that. No, not never. I've definitely given refunds. But the reason that it is that way is because, this is my full-time job. And this is the money that I use. This is my paycheck, right? When that money comes in, this is how I both pay for my business expenses and also how I have a paycheck to take home to my husband and myself. So if it's refundable, I have spent that money on rent. I spent it on food. I've spent it on our internet bill. I don't just hold it. I'm not a big enough entity that I can just have this money kind of sitting until I'm done with your wedding. Of course, that would be ideal, right? Because then I would have just tons and tons of Scrooge McDuck money, just sitting in an account somewhere. But I can't do that. I mean, this is my full-time work. Different vendors do it different ways. I mean, particularly now, a lot of vendors are having jobs outside of the wedding industry. And so they're going to structure their business models differently. And as far as this question of like, what do I think individual vendors should do as far as cancellations? I mean, I think you make a great point, Reed, of, we all do have the information right in front of us of like, COVID is a thing. When it will be over, who knows? So, we all need to go into it with our eyes wide open. I will say, and I hope this doesn't come off as patronizing, I don't think couples know what they don't know. And so I think as a vendor, as much as it puts the burden at your door to have to mention the potentially awkward thing, potentially mention the thing that could lose the client, lose the booking, I think you have to be upfront, and I have varying degrees of success myself with this. I mean, the last thing you want to talk to a new couple on the phone is, hey, so I know you really liked me. I know you're about to Venmo me half, but just so you know, I won't give it back, right? Like, that's a super awkward thing to say. And, obviously you wouldn't say it that way, but I think as a vendor, you do have to try and empower a couple, and try and be clear. And I have had really good responses from people, like you were saying, Reed, of just like, if you put it in the terms of like, this is the money that I live on. This is the money I use to pay my bills. This isn't money that I'm just, I don't know, spending frivolously and, rubbing in your face. I mean, this is money that I need to go to the grocery store tomorrow. People, I think, often are coming from a place of empathy with that. The wedding industry is very hard, though, in that sense, because I find that vendors, we're all very siloed because we all work at our dining room tables or in our offices. I mean, we don't work for big companies usually. And so because of that, we're often not very protected. And, we don't have unions. We don't have, many of us don't have easy access to insurance, or retirement plans. And so we can feel very, I think, just kind of on our back heels when couples want to have these conversations with us. But I think it's important to remember and remind people that, like, this is my job. This isn't, just a hobby. And then couples, I mean, I know, and maybe I seem like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but couples, I know that can be hard to come from that place, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't think anybody's job feels secure right now. So maybe you're feeling like, wow, I don't really want to go pay Beth $1,800 because it's a lot of money to me. And something happened and now I want my money back for the services that she did or didn't render. I think as much as possible, you need to remember that before making this investment. And couples that were planning early in the pandemic, I know that was difficult. Like, we didn't think that would be a problem. So that's its own gray area. But for couples who are actively planning now, who perhaps got engaged during the pandemic, or like really thinking, like, we're planning with this mindset of COVID is a reality now. It is a reality that could go on for much longer than we anticipate. It is something you need to talk about. Is this a gamble that we're willing to do? The $34,000, that's the average cost of a wedding in America. Is that an amount of money we feel comfortable investing, knowing that we likely will not get any of it back if things continue to go the way that they're going? And if the answer, understandably, is no, then you need to spend less money, because you're just going to save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of really hard emails and a lot of kind of making people who are just trying to do their job feel shitty. If you kind of have that conversation with yourself. And, I know it just kind of goes back to that prioritization, right? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this right now? How do we want to feel? If you kind of start from that blueprint with you and your partner, I think you will save yourselves a lot of heartache. And I think you'll save the people that you're hiring a lot of heartache.
It's not COVID related, but I do remember, to your point about, people paying in paychecks and things. I'll always remember it was right after because I did my whole day job, transitioning to full-time video over about the course of 9-10 months. And then I'll remember it was that first, I had no money, right? There was no paycheck. And I remember I had done a music video for a singer. And because that's like the thing you do when you're like up and start videographer, right? It's like all these music videos. Like, I got these old, like, you guys want to see like these old rap videos that I did. But I had this singer, and we ended up just spending a tremendous amount of time. Like, it was just hours and hours and hours of editing and doing all this weird color effects and all this stuff. And then, it got done, and she said it was done. And I think it was like $1,200 or something, like she owed, which was like a ton of money, for me, right, yeah, having no money
You're making
at all.
Zero.
Yeah. And I said, okay, here's the thing. And I remember, and she goes, well, I'm going to need, I need a paycheck or two. You're going to need to give me the time to get you the money to, to pay this. And I remember, thinking and writing and saying, like, that is not my problem that you need, like, this is my paycheck. And, and I completely understand, it's not an unsubstantial amount of money, but you knew that this was coming, right? And like you said, with planning the wedding, like, that these are the costs. And if you weren't ready for, you wouldn't go buy a car and finance it and then be like, well, I don't have the, whatever money every month to pay that, or I wouldn't buy a house or whatever. It's like, we worked on this for 3 weeks. Like, there's no surprise here that you knew that this was coming. And so I just will always remember that. And I'm so protective of that now, because I was so like mad about it. I'd just be like, well, why would you, like, this is, anyway, not to, I'm just repeating myself now, but
No, that makes sense. And I would say, so I think kind of distill kind of what you were saying, Rita, and what all my word vomit I was trying to say is, so vendors, the advice here is be really clear. If you're not clear in your pitch, I understand that can be uncomfortable, but be clear in your contract, right? I mean, we're just as, like, in the beginning when we all had pre-pandemic contracts, none of us know what force majeure was, right? I mean, that time has passed, unfortunately. We'll never get that innocence back. So make sure you're clear, right, in your contract. And couples, read your contracts, be clear about upcoming deadlines. One of the things I do as a planner for my clients on the books, but the clients can very easily do for themselves, is most often it's very clear when you owe people money. People are very good at telling you that. Make sure that you have those reminders on your calendar or your timeline or your family calendar on the fridge, whatever you use to keep your life in order. And set reminders a week, 30 days, 60 days out. So, because often this is a negotiation, right? Oh, okay, I see we're going to owe Beth our next third installment on March 1st of next year. Okay, let's have a reminder trigger February 1st, because how are we feeling? Do we want to do this wedding? I mean, once we pay her that money, we're not going to get it back. So we kind of need to talk. And I know that can be hard because it's going to by necessity jumpstart a lot of these conversations for couples, months before their wedding. It also is the best way to make sure that you aren't losing money unnecessarily. Like, I just sent a check-in to a couple today, because I email my couples every month, which is kind of a weird exercise right now because we all are kind of like, hey, see you in July. But I have a couple, their next, I think it's for their venue. They have a payment coming up at the end of December. And so I just said, hey, just want to keep this on your radar. That money is non-refundable. So if we need to change our plans, or we feel like we're going to change our plans, or we're not sure what about changing plans, this is the time to start thinking about this. So we have lots of room and space, because I have found such generosity from venues and vendors this year to just go out of their way, often when it means that they aren't going to make money, or they might have to lay people off, to make accommodations for couples, because this is so challenging. That gets a lot easier when a couple can kind of come to a vendor or a venue and be like, we've had these conversations. This is kind of what we're thinking. Where are we at with this? And so again, I know I keep kind of going back and forth on have conversations, but it's the best way I found to navigate this. Give yourself lots of time so that it isn't, the night before that payment's going to go on your credit card. And you're like, oh my God, I don't actually know if I want to have a 200-person wedding next July at this place, because my guess is you could talk to that venue, or you could talk to your vendors, because, they want to make this work with you too. And they also want to stay healthy and safe. We all have the same goals, and I think we can move in that direction together.
Yeah, the communication thing, and I've said that forever, that, when everything started, and then not so much now, but when it was, all these rapidly changing things, and, I emailed everybody, and I talked to so many vendors, and they're like, well, I'm kind of scared to do that, or I'm scared, kind of like they were afraid that they would email the couple and tell them something that the couple didn't know already. But it really
was a surprise.
Yeah. Hey.
Oh, I didn't, in case you didn't hear.
Yeah. No, but it totally was. And I'm like, no. You need to have these conversations, because then, for example, the one, wedding that we had, and it got, they were upset. I said, I don't know what you want me to tell you. I have been here having these conversations with you for months. This is not a surprise. You knew that I was offering live streams if we needed to do things, or reschedules if we needed to do things, or post. You know all these different things. But yeah, it's definitely having the communication thing, and not being, afraid of, well, what if I tell them something that they don't know already?
Totally. No. And it is a constant challenge and empathy, right? I've mentioned a couple couples this year. The couple that that I broke up with because the wedding actually didn't abide by county and state laws. But then just recently, I had to break up with a couple that they're getting married this coming January, and their wedding. This couple has gone above and beyond to make sure that their wedding is legal, make sure their wedding is safe. But at the end of the day, I was just in a place where it's just on my spectrum of COVID safety, whatever words we're using now. It was too in the red for me and my family. The main thing there being that they're going to meet the legal requirement in the state and county for 50 people indoors. But there's going to be food, and there's going to be actually no alcohol, but there's going to be drinking, right? There's going to be beverages. And I don't know about you, I haven't figured out a way to eat or drink with my mask on, as much as I would like to be. And it just was a place that I'm not at yet, that I don't feel comfortable yet. Being in a room with that many people with masks off, even if we're apart from each other, and even if there's good ventilation, it's a personal thing. And I don't say that to weigh judgment on anyone. It's very much my personal spectrum. And so what did I do there? If I had abided 100% by what my contract said, I could have just walked away. It's very clear in my contract that the money that they pay me, the half deposit they paid me, since they were a couple that hired me in January 2020, so before COVID came to our part of the world, I could have walked away. But that didn't feel in line with my values. So what I did was I found a planner that does fall within her spectrum of safety. I sent her all the collateral. I did an onboarding call with her. And I got her pretty much queued up, and she agreed to take the wedding for the balance that was owed. And then I did decide, okay, you know what? I don't feel like as much as I need that money, as much as I would love not to claim unemployment this week, I'm going to give the couple half back of their deposit. So the total amount they paid me was $900. I gave them $450 back. That way they could pay this new planner the $450 that I had given them back plus the $900 remainder, which is about, I think it's $1,350, which for coordinators, that's low, right? That's a low fee for a wedding. But this planner is because it's January, because she knows me, because I had done a lot of the work, we made it work, right? And that's the plan I proposed to the couple. And you send that email out, you're like, God, that's a lot of work. I want to go beyond. And this couple wrote me back and they weren't mad. They didn't threaten to sue me like the other couple I broke up with. So that was a win, but they weren't happy. They weren't pleased. Their email was very aloof by my judgment, very distant. And that hurts, right? That just hurts because, as a small business owner, everything that you've done and how much you'd love that $450 heading into the holidays. But it's not about me. Right? It's about their wedding. It's about the marriage they're going to give birth to. It's about me in relationship to them. And so I just had to come from as much as possible that place of empathy and try and serve them while also abiding by my own values and do my best and try and leave the campsite cleaner than I found it. But it's not easy. And I only share that example because I find sometimes in this mash of the world right now, it's helpful to have like tangible numbers. Mm-hmm. So hopefully someone listening to that is like, okay, I probably wouldn't have done it that way, Beth, but maybe I would have done it this way. And hopefully you can get value from that.
Yeah. So if a couple is to get to this, actual reason that I brought you on to talk about, kind of, but it's been, this has been fantastic. Yeah. If you are going to have a couple, they're wanting to get married next year, whenever. So you have on your website kind of a wedding policy template, COVID thing. And what is the mentality behind that? And kind of walk me through that and what you're doing with your couples.
Totally. So before I was a wedding planner, I was a journalist. So I only say that because one of the best ways I know how to communicate is through writing. Despite this podcast where you're probably like, well, you talk a lot too. So I have all my resources that I use as a wedding planner. I just make them free. They are on my website, both as blog posts and then Google Docs that people can download and edit and do what they will. And so I'm always just publishing stuff that I think would be useful for couples out there. And for vendors. I get a lot of emails from vendors who are like, oh, I use your timeline template. I'm like, that's cool. So the COVID safety policy, the thought behind that was when I was working actively on that wedding I did at the beginning of last month. It just seemed like a thing we should have, one of the funny things about working in the wedding industry is we don't actually have there's no OSHA, we don't have like a board of like rules or regulations, which can be a beautiful thing, but it can also be a completely frightening thing when you're like, well, what do I do? And so it just felt like as a coordinator, as kind of the conductor of this wedding, right, the project manager of this wedding, that I needed to put together a policy that I could have really for myself and my sanity, but also for the couple, for any, to use a jargony word, but any communication they wanted to use for their friends and family, many of whom have the same questions that we all do right now, like what are the rules? Should I wear a mask? All these things. Yes, you should wear a mask is always the answer, but are we wearing masks? And then also I wanted to have it for vendors to send it to them when I sent all my other stuff, my timeline and my FAQ and all that. And so what you'll find on the website is I've just created a template. So the thought here is that a couple or a vendor, but probably a couple would sit down and you go through different sections of like, you fill in what works for you, and I tried to cover most of the things that are going to come up for you. So like, where are we at with your county and state? What is our rules around food? That's a big one. Are we doing open buffet? Or are we doing plated? You're probably doing plated, but let's talk about that. Hand sanitizer, social distancing. Are we going to have dancing? A lot of these things that are going to come up, I try to get them all in one place so that you and your partner, or if you're a coordinator or someone else, who's a vendor using this, you can use this as a way to have those conversations. Because if you've taken nothing else from this conversation, it's that you got to talk about this stuff. And that adds a lot of emotional labor. It adds a lot of time. It adds just a lot of logistical work that, weddings weren't easy on that front before the pandemic, but it's just added this whole other tier to it. So the goal is then you would create this template, you create a policy that you can share. You can put it on your wedding website if you have one. You can put an email to vendors. You can print out to have on the day. But just so it's there in black and white, this is what we're doing. If you feel you need to justify it, this is why we're doing it. And it's all there for people to reference.
And yeah, and this is great. And so is the idea behind this having some accountability too, where like you're actually having to think through some of this stuff too. Like maybe we hadn't thought about that, or we didn't think about. I was going to tell you when you were talking about food, we had a wedding this year, and their dessert table was just these jars of cookies and not a tongue to be seen. And I
Oh
was
no.
like,
Some people are like, what do I do with my
I was
hands?
like, whoa, I wouldn't probably do this anyway at a wedding because I'm like kind of a germaphobe. But I was
Yeah.
like, especially with no tongs or napkins, like what, I just put my hand in and
Yeah.
I was like, this
I
is,
know.
yeah.
I have those thoughts all the time now, things I used to do before the pandemic that I'm like, what was I thinking?
But it's to make people think about these things beforehand, right?
Yeah.
And then giving it kind of a black and white thing to let, because that is the fear too, that a lot of vendors, and like you said, if your couple was doing something and you didn't feel safe, or someone else didn't feel safe, it's about the communication. Because we've had, and in our big wedding group, a week or two ago, one of the admins posted this whole story that a photographer got totally blindsided and showed up, and it was 100 people and no masks and all these things, and we kind of laugh at that. You're like, that is terrifying to think,
Right.
if you were a photographer and like, let's say you were, compromised, or we're taking care of a
Mm-hmm.
family member, and you could,
Totally.
like my mom is extremely immunocompromised, and she lives
Mm-hmm.
with my grandma who's 90 years old. And
Yeah,
so I have to be like, when the whole worry thing came down with me on
definitely.
Friday, we were planning to see my mom Sunday. And had I not gotten that test back in time,
Definitely.
we wouldn't have gone, and we did, and it was safe. But
Right.
so the idea is it not only holds the couples accountable, but then it also presents it in a way that is easily digestible by family, friends, and vendors, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting with the family part of this because, I not so much now, but I imagine it's still really top of mind for couples is, couples don't, I mean, it's kind of what you said earlier, Reed, about how like, vendors didn't want to kind of like be like, so this COVID thing, right? Because it's like, oh God, I don't want to mention it. I hear that a lot from couples as far as like, oh God, I don't like want to talk to my guests about it, and it's like, well, I mean, hate to break it to you, they're thinking about it, and how could they not be, right? I mean, of course, I'm sure there's weddings out there where your guests aren't thinking about it, and whatever they're on, I want some because that type of ignorance would be lovely as we go into just go into the holiday season. But my guess is 99% of the people in your world are thinking about this, and you are going to do them a favor as a couple if you have rules. And I know that sounds gross, and nobody wants to be the taskmaster. But if you're going to do this, and when I say this, we're talking about a wedding that probably has a guest count of more than 10. Perhaps there's an indoor element, which of course is a huge thing with COVID, right? If you're indoors, the risk goes up. If you're going to do this, this comes with it right now. And I know that's a really hard reality. You are also going to save yourselves a lot of heartache. And if it's not about you, then you're definitely going to save people you love a lot of heartache if you set some ground rules. And your vendors are going to appreciate it too. And I know on the tier of people we're caring about, that's understandable. You probably care about your mom more than you care about, your coordinator. That seems right to me. But you're going to make it, you're going to make it easier for everybody, and you're going to make it easier for yourself. So yeah, with the template, it is meant as a tool to talk about it, and talk about it. And I think what I want couples to know is, if you do this, if you sit down and your energy on this is just drained, you sit down and you're like, Lord, I don't know what we're planning, but I don't like it. It doesn't feel like us. Then that leads to another conversation, which is the thing that we're trying to create, is that what we want to do? And I know in a perfect world, in a world without COVID, you wouldn't have to have that conversation with yourself, right? But I think there is an opportunity here to, okay, the cookie cutter, right? Whatever we thought we were going to do, that's not working for us, right? It's draining our energy. We're fighting, we're just stressed out. We're anxious. We're exhausted when we think about our own wedding. That was happening before COVID, but it's definitely happening more now. And my whole thing is, don't do that to yourselves. Don't do that to your partner. Don't do that to your love. That doesn't have to come with wedding planning. And so that might turn into a conversation of, okay, what parts of this are giving us the most stress? How do we adapt to that? And at this point in wedding planning, and this part in the pandemic, we know a lot of those answers, right? Okay, well, the thought of being in a room with a bunch of people, my chest tightens up when I think of that. Okay, we know not to do that now. We know we have some options. Man, the idea of being indoors, I'm just not there yet. Okay, we have options, and I know that can feel like, oh my God, this is going to be like a 3-hour conversation. Then let's continue just to break it down. Let's tackle one piece today. Let's do baby steps. And I definitely have had couples that have been like, wow, okay, all we want to do is get legally married. We want to get legally married. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We want to have a marriage. We want to be on each other's health insurance. We want to, God forbid someone gets sick, we want to be the first of kin, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. That's a very simple conversation. You can get a marriage license very easily in our part of the world still. But then there's a gradient from there. So you have options. It's not just dead end after dead end. But you got to have the conversation to start, and multiple conversations.
This is great. This has been good. Thank you so much for kind of walking through some of this stuff. I know too, you wanted to talk about your new season of your podcast, and that was kind of the original impetus. Was I think you had messaged me and said, "Hey, could you ever run a spot, where I could talk about my podcast?" And I said, "Well, I'll do you one better. Why don't you just come on and we can do a podcast, and then people can hear you, and then also..."
Which was so generous, and I was like, "Well, that's awesome. I'd love that."
So, talk to us about that too before we go.
Oh, well, thank you, Reed. I really appreciate that. I know this is always like the weird part of these things. Because you're like, let me tell you something that I want to promote. The reason I think people will care about this who listen to this show, particularly if you're a vendor. So I have this podcast that's called The Teardown. The reason I did it was because I kept meeting super cool people in the wedding industry. And I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to talk to my friends. And when I started off, I've been in business 4 years, wedding planning. I had a lot of trouble finding people that kind of I vibed with. Not to be cliquey about it, but like people who love what we do, right? Love couples, love joy. But I didn't like a lot of what I saw in weddings. I saw a lot of the same stuff. I saw a lot of ageism. I saw a lot of just if it was a straight couple, so much gendered stuff. I mean, it was just, the list goes on and on. All these nasty isms is kind of the way I sum it up. So I was having a lot of trouble finding vendors who would talk about this stuff openly. And so that has influenced a lot of my work because I wanted just to create these gathering spaces where vendors could get together. Because like I said earlier, one of the hardest parts of our industry is we don't have any coworkers. There's no water cooler where all the vendors get together and they get to talk about, that thing on Saturday. These pockets exist, but they're very disparate and different people are in different things. So Altered, the event, was one of them. And then the Teardown is another one. So I interview vendors. And then I end every season talking to a couple. So this season, it's a 3-episode season, and it's my first sponsored season. We're being sponsored by Joy, which is a wedding app that is actually a super cool wedding app that really walks the walk, if you haven't checked them out. So I'm talking to 2 different vendors, Terica, who has been doing a lot around racial justice in the wedding industry this year. She's been for years, but particularly this year. And then Jordan Manny of All the Days. So Jordan, for those who aren't familiar with her work, among many other things, she was behind the Step Up Pledge, which came about earlier this year, which was calling upon big name wedding media, Martha Stewart Weddings, The Knot, Wedding Wire, to step up, to have more representation in their photos. So not just all cis straight white couples, to actually, show that lots of people get married. Why don't we see it in our pages? So I'm talking to both of them, individual episodes, and I'm ending the season with a couple. It's actually a couple of mine. So a couple that hired me during the pandemic, whose wedding is currently planned for next August, Sinclair and Julia. And we talk about, why did you hire me? Where are you at? Who are you hiring? Pandemic. What money are you spending? I mean, we really go into a lot of those details that I hope will be of value to vendors. If you're a couple listening, I know a lot of couples listen to the podcast just because they like to know what vendors, what do we do? You might really like to listen to the couple too, because I think a lot of what they share is what you're thinking about too. So it's called The Teardown. The season goes live in December. You can get it wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I did one of those a while back because we do a lot of these, obviously the vendor ones. And I said, I think I'm gonna talk to some couples this week because there was all this, we sit there and, well, the couples need to be thinking, da, 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 da. And I thought, let's actually hear. And it's great. And like you said, I do think, a lot of people are thinking the same things that you're thinking and asking the same questions you're asking and have the same doubts and whatever. And so, I definitely think there's almost more value sometimes to hearing those. And whether, like you said, whether you agree with them or not, or well, that was crazy. I wouldn't have done it that way, but I would have done it this way. It's really nice to hear that and know that you're not alone in that. And especially right now with what everyone's going through, all this stuff, being able to listen to maybe another couple that's going through that similar experience is invaluable because no one has ever, and hopefully will never go through all the same stuff again that
knock on wood, right?
That we
are, once in a lifetime.
That we are going through now. So but that's great. So thank you for that. And then just your wedding planning stuff in general, please plug before we go, just all your Elisabeth Kramer stuff.
Well, it's all on my website. So everything I've talked about, both client facing. So for couples out there, all those free resources that I mentioned, I have just oodles and oodles of blog posts because it's just what I do, particularly this year. When I thought I'd be working weddings, I just write a lot. So a bunch of stuff there. All my vendor stuff, I have a tab on my website that says for vendors. That is podcasts, that is the event Altered. I mean, it's all that stuff. And it's just at my website, elisabethkramer.com. And I am on Instagram. So it's Elisabeth Kramer PDX, because believe it or not, even though my names are spelled super weird, Elisabeth is with an S, not a Z, and Kramer is with a K, not a C. Even despite my weird name, Elisabeth Kramer was taken on Instagram. So I had to add my city little three acronym. So Elisabeth Kramer PDX and elisabethkramer.com.
Well, thank you again for this. I think we kind of had a general idea, but I think we stumbled into something good, and I think this was really good and valuable. And I just appreciate any vendors wanting to take their time to better kind of this community and provide resources and different thoughts. I think it's so valuable. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Reed. You're always so generous with using your platform in this way. So I love being on podcasts. So thanks for making this happen, and it's a pleasure to talk to you too.
We got it. Thanks again. This has been another episode of Best Made Weddings. I never made a good ending for this one. So we just always
mine is always awkward. Yeah. I'm like, and we're done.
Yeah. And cut. Perfect. Thank you.